At this time, we will have a reading from the 19th century American poet Walt Whitman, and this is titled Miracles. Why, who makes much of a miracle? As to me, I know nothing else but miracles. Whether I walk the streets of Manhattan or dart my sight over the roofs of houses toward the sky, or wade with naked feet along the beach just at the edge of the water, or stand under the trees in the woods, or talk by day with the one I love, or sleep in bed at night with anyone I love, or sit at a table at dinner with the rest, or look at strangers opposite me riding in the car, or watch honeybees busy around the hive of a summer forenoon, or animals feeding in the fields, or birds, or the wonderfulness of insects in the air, or the wonderfulness of the sundown, or of stars shining so quiet and bright, or the exquisite, delicate, thin curve of the new moon in spring. These, with the rest, one and all, are to me miracles, the whole referring, yet each distinct in its place. To me, every hour of the light and dark is a miracle. Every cubic inch of space is a miracle. Every square yard of the surface of the earth is spread with the same. Every foot of the interior swarms with the same. To me, the sea is a continual miracle. The fishes that swim, the rocks, the motion of the waves, the ships and the men in them. What stranger miracles are there? Here ends the reading. And now.
Walt Whitman asked his readers, who makes much of a miracle? He then confirms to his readers that actually, as to me, I know of nothing else but miracles. I selected that reading because this is a time of year when miracles and the supernatural are more present in our consciousness. Last night was the first night of Passover, a Jewish feast of unleavened bread and a festival of freedom that celebrates the miracle of a people delivered from bondage, guided through the wilderness, and sustained by faith and resilience across generations. Each week, the chalice lighting that we use, dedicated to the spirit of freedom, comes from the liturgy for that festival. For Christians, today is Palm Sunday, and during this holy week leading up to Easter, people honor the Passion of Christ and celebrate the miracle of resurrection, the triumph of life over death. This is the time of year when the media pays closer attention to these celebrations and the mysteries and miracles associated with them, whether through magazine covers, books, book releases, documentaries, TV shows, and films. It's not uncommon, especially in documentaries that you'll see on TV around this time of year, for the host to try to determine what really happened in a scenario described in a well-known biblical passage or story. How did the Israelites really cross the Red Sea? Or what route did they take if they walked for 40 years? Or did Jesus' disciples really see him in the flesh after his crucifixion? It's fascinating to ponder these questions, but it's also true that historians can't prove or disprove whether or not a miracle happened because historians rely on evidence that can be verified, and miracles, by definition, are supernatural events that defy natural laws and can't be empirically observed. Miracles are often matters of personal faith or belief, not something that can be measured or analyzed in the same way as historical facts. While historians can document the historical significance of miraculous events, they can't offer definitive proof of the supernatural causes behind them. So this morning, I'd like to spend some time thinking together about the historical significance of the emerging first century belief that Jesus of Nazareth had died and had risen from the dead. How did first century followers of the Jesus movement understand that belief? And what did their pagan neighbors think of that belief, and how did they compare it with their own belief system? As a side note, it's worth noting that while I will use the term pagan today, the people of the ancient world never actually referred to themselves that way. The term pagan came from the Latin word paganus, meaning country dweller, and was later applied by Christians to describe those who had practiced the old religions, because at that time, Christians were more urban dwellers, and the people in the countryside practiced the old religions, kind of the opposite of today, where city dwellers are considered not religious, and people in the country are. So anyway, in examining this, the retired professor of history, Martha Rampton, wrote about this topic in a book from 2021 titled Trafficking with Demons: Magic, Ritual, and Gender from Late Antiquity to 1000. One of the first things she mentions is that people who lived 2 millennia ago, as you can imagine, had a very different way of understanding the world than we do. In the first century of the Common Era, Christianity had emerged in a world where people had a detailed view of the universe as being both layered and hierarchical, with everything imbued with a spiritual life force. In ancient times, many believed that cosmic energy was alive, and that physical, spiritual, and ethical aspects of existence were interconnected with a variety of supernatural and sentient beings. For pagans, those forces could be understood as deities, and for Christians, they could be understood as angels or demons. A fun fact that modern people don't always know is that for the early Christians, though they were monotheists, they did believe in the existence of the pagan deities. But the twist is that they considered those deities to actually be demons in disguise. So, for example, the 3rd century Egyptian theologian Origen, who was also one of the first universalists in church history, said in one of his books, "The gods of the nations are demons, and they are worshipped by the foolish multitude." In the early days of Christianity, one of its central challenges as an emerging faith movement was to distinguish itself from the broader religious landscape of the ancient world, especially when it came to concepts of life, death, and resurrection. Despite the great differences between pagan and Christian views of mortality, there were also striking similarities that complicated Christianity's efforts to carve out a unique identity. Take the topic of the resuscitation of dead bodies. One example of that is something that's called necromancy. Necromancy was a common practice in the ancient world where the dead were called back to life, often for the purpose of revealing the future. There are tales of necromancy in pagan, Jewish, and Christian sources. While pagan texts often describe this practice as eerie or repulsive, it wasn't necessarily condemned if it was done carefully and for a worthy goal. So in the 2nd century novel titled The Metamorphoses by the author and philosopher Apuleius, a character named Zachlus, who is a prophet, revives the dead body of someone named Telpharon to help solve a mystery surrounding his death. Telpharon's body is revived with the use of an herb and a prayer to the sun, and when the man returns to life, he complains about being dragged back from his journey to the afterlife. This event, while eerie, was justified by its noble cause, which was revealing the truth about Telpharon's wife's involvement in his death. This was seen as an example of how the ancient world engaged with the dead. Other than the occasional stories of necromancy, for the most part, pagans in the ancient world had a distaste for anything having to do with the dead. The dead were shunned, cemeteries were built outside of city walls, and dead bodies were swiftly buried or burned. But for many pagans, Christianity's relationship with death seemed quite unusual and distasteful. Christians revered death in ways that pagan cultures did not. Christians boasted of a crucified Savior, reinventing a symbol of execution and shame into one of salvation and renewal. In addition, they held feast days to honor martyrs. They venerated the physical remains of saints, and were even known to cherish the body parts of those who had died for their faith as relics. To pagans, this was unsettling and morbid. Pagan critics saw Christians as people who were fascinated with death, to the point of performing what they perceived as disturbing rituals, such as consuming the body and blood of the Messiah in the Eucharistic meal, which pagans viewed as akin to cannibalism. Yet, Christianity also offered an especially unique view of death and resurrection. Where necromancy was viewed with fear and repulsion, Christian resurrection was seen as a miracle. It wasn't just about bringing someone back from the dead, it was about the restoration of life in a divine and purposeful way. The Gospel of John captures this difference in a striking way when it recounts the resurrection of Lazarus. Jesus calls to his friend Lazarus from his tomb, saying, "Lazarus, come out." And when the dead man emerges from the tomb, bound in cloths, Jesus commands, "Unbind him, let him go." In contrast to the gruesome rituals of necromancy, this resurrection was pure and simple, an act of divine compassion rather than divine power or control. Christianity's resurrection was about the power of God to overcome death, and it didn't require herbs, magical incantations, potions, or spells. Through sacred texts where the apostles defend Jesus from accusations of being a magician, and by emphasizing Jesus' divine nature through his virgin birth, early Christians insisted that their faith was not like the other religions of the time. The virgin birth, they argued, set Jesus apart from all other miracle workers and holy men. It was a sign that he was not just another prophet, but the Messiah, the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. This was an important distinction because in the ancient world around the time of Jesus, there were other holy men who claimed to have raised the dead. But Christians rejected comparisons between those figures and Jesus, insisting that Jesus alone had divine power, and anyone who did something similar was clearly engaging in demonic or magical practices. As the decades and centuries passed, and more people chose or were pressured to convert to Christianity, they came to accept, through sermons from the pulpit and quiet correction in the confessional, that Christian resurrection was distinct from necromancy and other magical rites. So for us today, so far in time and worldview from those ancient debates, the distinction between resurrection and necromancy likely seems like an arcane theological detail. Nevertheless, these stories still have something to teach us. Not because we take them literally, but because they reflect an enduring human effort to wrestle with issues like mortality, meaning, and hope. We here understand religion not as a fixed revelation handed down from on high, but as a living, evolving expression of human longing for justice, for connection, for transcendence, and yes, for immortality, however you understand that. These ancient controversies remind us that all religions are shaped by the cultures and communities that carry them forward. And yet, within these stories of death transformed, of freedom claimed, of love remembered, we can still find inspiration. We can still find ways to speak of miracles, not as suspensions of natural law, but as moments that awaken us to what is most deeply human. Qualities like courage, compassion, and the possibility of new life. All of which brings us back to today's reading by Walt Whitman. In his poem about miracles, he asks his readers to notice the wonders already happening all around us in the smallest and most mundane details of life. Whitman, like the spiritually attuned in every age, reminds us that the sacred isn't necessarily found in supernatural interruptions, but in the holiness woven into the fabric of the most ordinary of things. The streets of Manhattan, the rhythm of the seashore, the hush of a forest, the rising and setting of the sun, the new moon in the spring, and the creatures of the earth, sky, and sea. Life pulses all around us, not by our doing, but certainly deepened by our noticing. So as we mark this season of miracles, let's resist the urge to imagine miracles only as events from long ago. Let's instead turn our attention to the miracles unfolding right now. Not miracles that suspend the laws of nature, but moments that awaken us to our full humanity, and which invite us to live with reverence, attention, and hope. May we learn to see with Whitman's eyes and live as if everything is a miracle.